What is up, guys? We're about to do a part two to this conversation that I'm having with Chris Lackhan. The other day I got cut off. My phone overheated. I'm hoping this time around that doesn't happen again. We'll see what happens. Anyway, we'll wait around for some people to pop in. Sure, it should take about another minute or two for Chris to pop up as well. Amy Clark Physio, what's going on? José Tomás Enríquez, ¿qué onda? Yeah, so last time we got into kind of taking responsibility and essentially taking the narrative as to where the world is going to go. We're kind of in a funky space as a species right now, and I think that we're not. I think the powers that be and the people that are taking the narratives have no idea where the hell we're supposed to go, and that they don't have approaches that are going to actually get us to better places. And so we're going to discuss a little bit of that and really just close out the talk that we were having before for people that are in FP. Okay, view request. No problem, Joe. Happy to do it. Mr. Lackhan, what's cracking, dog?
Hey, what's up, Nelly?
How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it seems good for now. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, well, so last time we got into the conversation about taking responsibility, man, and it's becoming increasingly clear. For those of you that saw the talk the other day, you'll see that the call got cut off abruptly. It was because my phone overheated. I'm hoping the same thing doesn't happen now. The conversation was getting heated. We were starting to get into the good stuff when it came to the dialogue we were about to have, and yeah, unfortunately, I wound up getting cut off. But we're going to kind of continue the conversation, and essentially, I've had a lot to think about, even just from a couple of days ago when we were talking, man. And it's becoming increasingly obvious to me that we're not as a community, we're not really making friends out of anybody within it, just mainly because we're adopting a mind frame that's never really been adopted before ever. And like, unfortunately, in our society, the way that people usually get on board with the concept is when it makes money, like quick, easy money. So, like, for example, CrossFit was an industry that happened to be, one where people just jumped all over it real quick because all you needed was a weekend certification. You start up a business, and then from there you're ready to make money. When you look at yoga, it's the same thing. People just say, hey, look, I'm going to get a quick certification, or I'll go do this teacher training. I'll spend 100, 200 hours there. There's not really much intelligence involved, or thought involved in it. We're just going to kind of go through the steps, open up a yoga studio, and start making money off the branding of yoga. You see this all the time. And with FP, unfortunately, I tend to find that the more people I draw into FP that are really about it, it's usually people who don't want quick, easy money or quick, easy notoriety or quick, easy status. They seem to want to earn their keep in life and in society in general. And that's kind of what my perspective has been. Not because I don't think it's because I'm a real virtuous guy or whatever. I think part of it is because I could have probably fit into some pretty stupid people with the personality traits that I do. But also it's because of circumstance. I don't think that people are going to look at me immediately and say, well, I want to give into what you say just because you're you now. Like, I'm not the blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy. So I think at some level I'm in a position where I have to be useful if I'm going to succeed in life. And I'd imagine that seems to be reflect pretty much a good portion of the people that are in FP. Obviously not everybody. Some people are they carry more of the status quo shell on the exterior, and they still abide by trying to do the right things. But for the majority, I tend to find that it's not going to be an easy path for us, just mainly because there's not a lot of us in the beginning, and we're really going to have to rely on getting results. But what are your takes on it, Chris?
Um, I think one thing that might be really important. It's like You know, like when Rolo talks about frame,
Yes.
I think I think a lot of people. I mean, even myself, I still work on this all the time. You need to have like if we were to take that concept and add it and put functionality into it, I think people in the FP community need to adopt a very strong functional frame where they operate from.
That's
Um,
that's that's perfect.
um,
Absolutely.
and for example, like I learned this lesson a long time ago. So one time I went to a fight. One of my coaches was fighting. So I had two coaches. I had a primary coach and a secondary coach. My secondary coach was still actively fighting, and my first coach was still the main instructor. So we went to Atlantic City, and at the time I looked up to all the higher belts in the gym, because any social circle there's a hierarchy, right?
Yep.
So I'm like, okay, I look at the higher belts. I'm only like, I'm a lower belt. I think I should look at what they listen to them or try to emulate them. So we go to AC, and I've never been alcoholic. I've never been a big alcohol person. But when we went to AC, I got pressured into drinking. Like I drank a lot. I'm talking about I was drinking anything people gave me. Like you know when you mix drinks and you get all fucked up. So I was up all night. I was throwing. It took me about a week to get over that hangover. But anyway, so when we went back to the gym on Monday, right, I was still really hungover. And then my coach, he calls me. He's like, okay, we start sparring. And he's like, Chris, me and you first. Let's go. And I'm like, fuck. So we start training, and he just beats the shit out of me. Like, and I'm not talking about like he taps me 50 times. It's like he'll put me in mount and just like smash my face with his shoulder, knowing that I'm dehydrated and I'm still hungover, just to make me learn that lesson. And then right after the round was over, right there on the mat, like everyone's switching partners, he comes up to me and he's like, do you drink? And I'm like, no, I don't. He's like, did you drink this weekend? And I was like, yeah. He's like, why? I was like, I felt like I needed to. And he's like, if someone bought you a cup of shit, would you take it? And I was like, probably not. So he's like, why the hell are you drinking? He's like, he's like, I drank one time in my life when I was 19 and I learned my lesson. And he's like, and then he made this distinct separation between like the guys that are performers in the gym and then the average person that comes to the gym. And he was like, do you want to be the person that comes to the gym and you basically just get bent over every time you have to spar? It's like, do you want to be that guy? And I was like, no, I don't want to be that guy. And like, when he had that little talk with me, I understood. I'm like, yeah, you can't follow the crowd for the most part. Like if you have a clear
That's
goal in your head,
phenomenal. That's
yeah,
really fun. This is phenomenal. I'm glad that people exist like this. But yeah, go on. That's fucking amazing.
yeah.
Oh
So
God,
and
what a relief.
since that day forward, man, like it was like okay, I kind of had like tunnel vision on what I wanted to do at the gym. It's like I come, I do what I need to do to get better at jiu-jitsu, get better at competing, and then like all the other people, it's just like they don't. Okay, I'll be polite and courteous to them and acknowledge them because I still need training partners. But it's like I'm here. This is my frame, and
Yes.
it's not gonna break. So when I got into FP, I went through a little phase where it was like I was feeling out the community. I didn't know anything. I'm like, okay, these are the higher up people here. Let me see what they're doing. Let me talk to them, whatever. And then it was like, okay, it became apparent in the beginning. This was years ago. I'm like, okay, not everyone is at the same place. Let me just listen to Naudi all the time. I was like, let me just read all his fucking posts. Like I went back like 4 years on your Instagram. I'm like, okay, let me read this, let me read this. Let me go on the functional patterns page. Let me go over and read this. Every time you had a feed, I would look at it, listen to what he's saying. And if there was something I didn't understand, I would be like, okay, let me just pocket this. And then sometimes, honest man, like I'll take a poster that I saved and I'll look at it like 2 years later. Like I still do that. I think I did some of that this morning actually, kind of like preparation for this interview.
Yeah.
So it's like I can't really. I mean, at some point, it's like you have to trust your own. It's hard to say, man, because then some people suck at interpreting information. You know what I mean? But like, it's like I trust myself just because of the experiences that I've had. Like I haven't had like experiences where stuff was spoon fed to me. Like I've had to learn the hard way. So like I was saying yesterday,
clearly, if you did this much research, bro, it's like I take a very similar approach in that regard, where I just look deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. I'm like, okay, what's this? How did that lead to this? Okay, who's that? What did they do? What's their back? Okay, they did this, this, and this. Be like, is that legit? Let me take a look here. Where did that come?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I'm assuming you take a similar mindset to your research, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, like, it's not easy to, for me especially, it's very hard to fool me, I would say. And that's not to like say, talk highly of myself, but it's just like, coming from like a third world country, you have to be able to differentiate who the con artists are very, very early. Because there's a lot of those in poor countries.
Yes, crazy.
Um, yeah,
That's insane, bro. Because what's interesting about it, bro, is actually with that said, what about when you go back and you look at the posts? I feel like I've changed quite a bit. Although, the funny thing is, bro, I went through a big purging cycle where I pretty much deleted a bunch of my old posts just
yeah,
because I went on some deep dives on some things where I'm like, but the funny thing is, I remember like it was about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when I deleted everybody off my friends list on Facebook. Like I unfollowed everybody just because the reason I unfollowed everybody was because it's like you would understand that people would start making posts catering to you, and sometimes they would do it to kiss your ass, and then other times they would
yeah,
do it if you didn't respond to something that they put up, they would put something to kind of try and agitate you to see if they would issue a response. So I was like, okay, I'm going to
yeah,
start like just getting rid of all this shit in my life, and so I was like, I'm just not dealing with it anymore. And so in that time frame, I was working with the team, and like we were all looking at it. I was like, yeah, guys, I got to take down all the memes that I used to do, and they're like, no, man, that sucks, because there were some really
yeah,
freaking good memes that I
yeah,
put forth, bro, like really good ones that revealed a lot about the fraudulent nature of human beings. And really, fraudulence to me is just more of a byproduct of stupidity overall. Because I mean, if you do the math and you think, okay, if I'm a fraud and everything that I do is fraudulent, and other people copy my behavior of fraudulence or they fall for my stupidity, ultimately that comes back to me and hurts me in the end. It's
right,
like
yeah,
it's kind of like it's stupid to be fraudulent. It's not like you're fraudulent and then like it's not like you're fraudulent and then it's outside the confines of stupidity. Being fraudulent is stupid. It's a stupid behavior essentially.
yeah,
And so
no,
for
for sure.
me, I feel like I don't feel like I've changed much. I still look at the old shit that I've done and I'm like, man, I really like certain elements of that guy. But then I look like real far back. Like one funny thing is, I'll look at the Instagram and I'll see like Lewis Ellery off of the functional patterns page has been clicking like on some old ass post, and I'm like, okay, thanks for highlighting that, Lewis, because I'm gonna delete that shit. Because I'm like, I look at what my face looked like then, I look at what my nonverbal communication was, what my structure was back then, and it looks quite a bit different than who I am today. Like my structure physically looks different. The way I punctuate, the way I project my voice, it's different from what it used to be. And so a lot of times, bro, I can't even look at the stuff in the past because, quite honestly, it's embarrassing. And I can't imagine what it'll be in about 5, 10 years. I don't look at any of the stuff that I've written before, man, because for me personally, it's embarrassing. Like I'm like, oh, there's so many variables I wasn't accounting for. Some I did, and obviously some that I didn't. And even right now, as I speak, I just think about what the potential is for me to look at myself like I'm a complete idiot in about 5 years. But I think if you're not doing that, if you're not looking back at yourself in 5 years going like, you know what, I had this wrong, I had that wrong. Yeah, the general vision was okay, but I made all these mistakes. I think in some way, shape, or form, you're just in a plateau, you're in a rut, and that's a problem. So I don't see it as a bad thing, but I guess the question I would ask you is how do you perceive some of the stuff that I talked about before? Is it still somewhat on point? Because I don't even remember what I was talking about even a year ago, 2 years ago.
I mean, I think a lot of it is still on point, man. Especially like the hydration stuff, um, just like leverage, like planes of motion being very important in movement. This is just like, I mean, it's a lot of the stuff it's I would say it's fundamental. It's just like
Yeah, yeah, that stuff for sure. Yeah, I would definitely say that. Yeah, as it relates to hydration, in terms of in case you guys, the audience is wondering, as it relates to my perspectives on hydration, it's kind of like imagine you have a sponge that's been squashed and it's never actually gotten like expanded. That it will never draw in water into the actual sponge. That a sponge that's under constant compression will never draw water in. And so essentially, when you move correctly, what you're actually doing is you're taking the sponge and creating a little bit of expansion so water can pool in. But then at some point, you want to be able to squeeze that sponge to get the water out and then suck it back in. And so, yeah, somebody's mentioning right here, Chris, that they can't really hear you. Can you get a little closer to the camera? If anything,
yeah,
dip it down a little bit too, bro, because you're
yeah.
kind of cut off at the bottom of the screen.
Okay. Yeah, right here. I just put it on the mat, just have it a little bit higher. But is this better?
Yeah, that's better there.
Okay.
But yeah, I find it interesting that I think that unfortunately, I think the FP community is it's still a small community because it's still very hard to get into. Like, it's hard to bullshit it. Like, people will be like, you know what? People will try and get me pissed off and be like, you see this fucker copying you and whatnot. And I just tell those people, hey man, just focus on yourself these days. But I'll say they aren't really copying us, because if they were copying us, they would get the same results, man, and they don't. And so what I tend to find is that it's going to be a bit of a laborious road for people in FP in general. Like, it's going to be tough, because in order to develop wisdom, you have to go through wisdom inducing events. Like, you need to have, if you didn't have that guy there to check you when it came to jujitsu, do you think you would have come to the same realizations that you come as quickly as you have, Chris?
I don't think so, man. Because my coach, he was on me a couple times actually, because saw I was just kind of like I was drifting from like kind of where he wanted me to be, and I can't even count how many times he would pull me to the side just to kind of like, hey bro, you're fucking up. You need to stop. You need to stop this. You need to stop this.
Well, this is how is this for interesting though, bro? Like, in FP, we don't really have that capacity to do that, because in jiu-jitsu you get to beat somebody's ass and not actually damage them, right? You just get to let them suffocate. In FP, it's like you get to behave like a fraud, and then nobody really, like, what are you going to say? The only thing you can do is logically deduce that somebody's being fraudulent or they're being stupid. But unfortunately, like, you can't be in you can be in denial in situations like that, and then people will be like, all right, you know what, we can accept your denial and just be okay with it. Unfortunately, that's just kind of like the way the world works, man. At least as it relates to us in FP, is that we're afforded more denial because you won't get your ass whooped doing it, unfortunately. But it's like, even if you beat somebody's ass in FP, it wouldn't really even prove a point. It's like,
right.
how do you pin somebody into a corner to show that they're completely fraudulent when if they're being fraudulent? What I found for myself is that that's why it comes back to this whole premise of trying to get results. And I was having a discussion one time. I don't check my DMs unless it's like people that are in FP or whatever, or they tag me. I typically don't check my DMs, and I don't answer most people. But every once in a while, I'll talk to people and they'll ask questions. There was this one gal who had hit me up, and she was uh, prompting questions, and essentially I tried to narrow her down into like what the problems were as it related between FP and other systems. And she finally said, man, she's like, I was like, what are the results that other people get? She's like, I don't know. She's like, but yeah, there are people that get results in this industry. Like, there's people that get before and afters and do all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah. Do you notice the specificity of the results where people look better and they feel better? They're out of pain. And at the same time, there's also quantifiable metrics, whether there's people running faster, even jumping higher, doing whatever, where there's quantifiable metrics to actually display that a change has been made along with the sustainability. And she was like, huh. She's like, man, you know, this is going to kind of be tough to explain to people. And I'm like, yeah, it is, because it's hard to really gauge what FP is about until you do it in person. I think a lot of times
Right.
people have carried preconceptions about who I am and what I do and whatnot until they actually meet me in person, and until they actually meet a practitioner in person and do the training. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. This really is actually like getting to the ground floor of what biomechanics is supposed to be about, of what the field of movement is about. And so it's going to be a struggle, and that's kind of what I'm actually curious. What do you find in terms of where you're at right now in your facility? How
Mm-hmm.
receptive are the people to you explaining these concepts to them? Like, what are the conversations like? Are they open to the inner depths of what FP is about? Are they just simply wanting to show up and exercise? What's their mentality like when they pop into the gym? Generally
Um,
speaking.
Generally, I would say most people when they come in, they actually have no idea what FP is about. So, what I do is like when I have a first time client, I don't talk too much actually. I just kind of like, okay, here we're gonna focus on this today, and then just kind of put them through the session, and just try to have them feel tension in their body that they're not used to feeling. And when I get that tension, then I add like a little blurb like, oh, okay, this is why here, like this is why, okay, your glutes firing here because you're not used to using your glute here, but you need this activation here. And then it kind of makes more sense once they have a direct feedback that they could relate to, instead of just like harping for like 30 minutes, but they don't have an
Of course.
excuse to fall back on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in general, they're not, and that, you know what, that's part of the problem too, man. Is that the reason I can't, I would like to display more of what FP is about, but I feel like if we explain too much, it turns people off, because then it comes off as being really complicated. So it's kind of like
Right.
it's just so tough, man. Because what we do is, I think it's easier. I mean, let me put it this way: in the beginning phases of employing, actually, you know what? Let's go back to that mind frame thing, bro.
Okay.
Because I just realized right now, because that frame of reality that you were talking about, let's actually take because you had mentioned a frame of reality. I think that's a really really important thing. Um, let's go back to that. So when you think about things in terms of frames or whatever, like, because this is going to kind of get into what I was talking about before. When you think about how you frame or what your frame of reality is, how difficult was it in the very beginning to adopt this new frame and deal with kind of like the rebuttals that people would give you? How difficult was that in the beginning, and how difficult is it these days?
Rebuttals. Give me an example of like rebuttal. What do you mean?
So okay, perfect. So let's say I had a client that one time told me, like, uh, my friends, my family, my partner, they like having dinner. And after meeting you and actually following your protocols, when I don't eat after 5 p.m., most of the time, I feel great. So I try not to eat after 5 p.m. or 4 or 5 p.m. And I'm great. Even sometimes I try to stop eating like at 3 or 4. That's when I feel best. And so she was like, every time I do that, I feel great. But then at some point, I end up having to battle my environment because my parents, my cousins, my partner, everybody that's around me is trying to eat dinner. And whenever I don't eat dinner, I'm kind of like the buzzkill. And then I end up having to deal with that difficulty. Do you ever find yourself having to deal with that in your own life, or have you kind of created enough of a bubble where people's dysfunctional behaviors don't end up bleeding into your life? So I guess that's the first question: is have you been able to shield yourself from that, or do you still have to deal with that to some extent or the other?
Man, I would say I have my own little bubble here. Like literally here, I have no family. I have zero. I mean, friends or it's just literally just me and my girlfriend, and she's
Okay.
also an FP. So, like, yeah, I pretty much, I like if I'm not working, I'm usually in the gym, just I'm either trying to rest or I'm tinkering with something, or I'm outside trying to recover. So I mean, one of the big reasons I left New York was so I would be able to kind of create in my own little bubble where I can just focus on what I need to focus on. I mean, I was able to do it in New York, but I don't know if you remember, man, at HBS2, I was fucking fat, and it was that transition that was really stressful on me. So then, I mean, the pandemic was a nice little change. It allowed me to like, okay, let me just focus on kind of dropping some body fat, get back on my regimen. But now that I'm out here, it's like I can pick and choose who I want to associate with. For example, the other day, like my girlfriend's best friend actually lives here, but I never hang out with them, never, because I can't hang out with them because number one, she's a foodie, and then her boyfriend is like, he likes to drink and just eat all the fucking time. So one time I was like, okay, let me just tolerate them to be polite. So they came to the swimming pool where I live in my complex, and they bring a fucking two 6, 12, whatever, how many packs come in a beer. They brought two of them, and they know I don't drink, right? So it's like there's like this unspoken rule that if they just bring stuff, I have to oblige them. Kind of like what happened when I drank an AC. It's like people bought me drinks, but I didn't want to drink it, but I drank it out of obligation. But here, I'm like, yeah, I'm not drinking, man. Like, so I just completely just sat there. I fucking fell asleep on the pool while they were trying to socialize. And yeah, ever since then, they've never like asked to hang out with me again, which is fine by
God.
me because, um, but as far as like clients, this is what I do. Like, if I have a client that they can't get their eating under control, I'll bring it up a couple times, and I'm like, and then I'll leave the messages that right. Then the next time they come in, and I see that they're bloated, then I just wreck them on core shit. And then I'm like, you see why you can't pull your stomach in? It's because you don't want to fix your fucking eating.
That's very good. Yes,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's
It's like
fantastic. But
I always try. This is the lesson I learned from my instructor, man. Like he knew I was hungover, so he taught me the lesson in that mat. So I try to do that with training. You see what I'm saying?
yeah,
It's
absolutely,
like because
absolutely.
when you talk, it's like sometimes it goes in one ear and comes out the other for a lot of people. It's like they need to have that experience of, damn, like shit. I need to get my shit together.
Absolutely, that's fire as shit, bro. It's really really good. I was actually gonna bring up to the audience that adopting a strong frame of reality is probably the most important thing that you can do. And I'll have to say, this is why I've always recommended Rollo Tomasi's work, because him and most people that do game, anybody who does game that goes out to go approach women, they always talk about framing, like your frame,
Yeah.
and not enabling people to break your frame of reality. And what I always try and tell people in FB is that you have the strongest frame because it's tied in directly to physics, to the natural laws, and that if you
Exactly.
orient
Yeah.
your behaviors around natural laws, that it's virtually impossible to break it. The problem is that when people, like a huge issue that I've had, which I'm so glad that Fresh and Fit and Rolo Tomasi is doing the work that he is that I finally have a resource to kind of send over to not just men but to women as well, and just say, hey, look, like men and women, they're so inclined to allow somebody else's frame of reality to kind of invade their current value system. So let's say,
Yeah.
for example, men oftentimes will they'll be an FP, and we've had this problem before, and the woman will adopt more materialistic values, more value perspectives that relate to acquisition, impressing their parents, impressing their friends. You get what I mean? Like where they bring in this nonsense, and it's put men. What I found is that many times when you can see that somebody doesn't make it an FP, especially as a male, it comes down to the fact that they simply cannot just put their partner in check and say, hey, look,
Yeah.
why are you doing the things that you're doing? What's the
Right.
point of that? Like I was watching the Fresh and Fit podcast, I believe yesterday or the day before. I watched a little bit yesterday, but I watched it the day before. And this chick ends up calling her ex on the show because they're just like doing a stupid truth or dare thing. And she calls her ex on the show, and she calls him and she's like, hey, man, I'm horny. I want to have sex. And he's just kind of like, you could tell this dude has gotten laid a lot. You could tell he's just like, okay, cool, whatever. You want to have sex? Big deal. She was a real attractive looking girl, so ultimately I can imagine this guy had to be pretty studly. And she's like, oh, sorry, I just had to call you and tell you this because I was on this show and we did Truth or Dare, so I had to do it for entertainment. And he's like, well, that's stupid. Why'd you do that? What's the point of that? And what I think is amazing about it, bro, is how much, like, I've had clients who were like who'd be with it, like they'd have problem with their husband, and this has happened multiple times. It's always women that will bring up their problems to me. Men won't. Men have
Hmm.
problems bringing up their problems with their partners because in some way, shape, or form, most men see it as like, oh man, I if I can't keep my woman in check, then you know what? Then I'm not a man at all, and you know what? I'm worthless. And so it's usually
Right.
women that ask me and say, hey, like my husband was supposed to remember this on my birthday, this and that, and I'm like, I've never remembered my girlfriend's birthday on the day that it was supposed to be remembered. If it was ever remembered, it'd be like about 2 weeks down the line, and I'm like, oh man, your birthday, it's October, it's at the end of October. That's what I know is when your birthday is. I've never remembered my girlfriend's birthday. I have no aspirations to, and I told her to intentionally forget the day that my birthday is because I don't want, like, I think that's a trivial thing to think about. I think it's irrelevant. What's the point of it? And ultimately, it's led to like me appreciating her more throughout the day, and not just saving it up for 1 or 2 special days, which is an anniversary or whatever. And then you treat each other like crap the remainder of the year. It's so
Right. Right.
I just think that so often what men, especially in FP, don't do is they don't have a frame. Like for example, when I first started FP, bro, when I first started it, I had one of my first interns who came in who literally was like, you know what? I never want to get married and I never want to have kids. It's just I never want to do either of those because he was watching enough zeitgeist stuff and he saw the state of the world and where it was at. Sure enough, he found a woman that he found to be attractive enough to pretty much trash all his values for that he had adopted just so he could get laid. The amount of times that I've
Yeah.
seen this happen in life, especially as it relates to men, is just flabbergasting, bro. And like it's impossible not to look at it. And so I'm just really happy that like Rolo's work exists. So at least so people, especially males and women as well, but it's mostly men that have this problem because women pull the frame away from living in terms of natural mechanisms and they bring it back to like feministic notions and idealistic notions that don't make any sense and that
Yeah.
don't tie into physics in any way, shape, or form. So I think it's important. Like when you talk about frame, it's so important that men understand that, look, especially if you're an FB, you have the strongest frame that a human could ever have. You can have a rich millionaire or billionaire tell you, hey, look, I made all this money. Look at me. I got this Bentley, all this stuff. And then you could look at them and be like, yeah, but you got a very, very strong rib compression, you have a strong lateral pelvic shift, knee valgus, you look like a turd. You look like you turned and you made all
Yeah,
this
right.
money. And because you didn't respect physics, yeah, you were successful under the social imperative, but as it relates to the biological imperative, you're an absolute failure. So it's like it gives you a position to have like firm ground to say, hey, look, well, if I orient myself around natural mechanisms, I don't necessarily need to make loads of money or attain loads of status. I can feel accomplished without necessarily having to accomplish anything in the traditional sense. I can actually just make myself regenerative and make other people regenerative. And that in and of itself is my accomplishment in life. And then at that point, I don't end up feeling bad about myself. So I think the fact that you brought up that framing is really, really important. But the question I was going to ask you, Chris, is how long do you find that it takes before adopting this frame with everything you do becomes easy? Because I'd imagine at first it probably wasn't as easy as what it is now. Because now it's probably like whatever. It's probably like freaking pooping in the toilet, flushing it down, and flushing the poop down the toilet at this point, right? You're probably like, who
Yeah.
cares, right?
Well, here's the thing. It was easy for me to adopt, even like when the situation happened with my coach, like, like, my position in life, just based on my race, my background. I didn't have a lot of privilege in the beginning, so I didn't have anything to lose. See what I'm saying? Like,
Totally.
I had everything to gain. I'm like,
Yeah, but look, Chris. I realize that, bro. But at the same time, could you have sold drugs or done something like that at a certain point in your
okay, I see
life?
what you're saying. Yeah, no, for
No,
sure.
no,
Yeah, that would never cross my mind.
I
Yeah.
get it, and I understand the humility. I get it. The humility is great, bro. I understand that. But at some level, you do got to give yourself credit, bro, because as much as you could have been like, well, I didn't really have many options. I guess you didn't relative to the understanding that you're a smart individual, you're an intelligent human, and you understand the pathways that aren't going to serve you. But you could have found other ways to do some shady shit to probably succeed in
Yeah.
life. I think anybody can choose to do that. So obviously you had to make that choice. But regardless, but yeah, continue on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interject or
Um,
interrupt.
but I mean, like in the beginning, I think that the biggest thing was just seeing how different my old social circle interacted with me. It's like to them it was like I went insane. Um,
How explain that? Give me some examples.
well, the first thing they said, oh, you're in a cult. Um, yeah, that's the big one, right?
Yeah. So
um,
okay, how did they? Okay, so how did that come across? Because that we don't really get that anymore. Back in the day, we used to get
yeah,
it. We don't get that shit anymore. Fortunately, there's more culty, fringy systems out there right now that have taken that
yeah,
title away from us. So now we're not
yeah.
really a cult. But how did that come about? And then what do you think prompted them to believe that, and then never or not believe that to use that term?
Yeah.
Because most time when I tend to find that people use that term is because they can't defend their position anymore, and the only thing they can do is insert a pejorative term to
Yeah.
try and deflect from the fact that they're doing something stupid and they don't want to take ownership for it, right? So so,
So
so give me an example. How did this come about? Because that shit to me is
the
fascinating.
the one that stands out to me was like this guy that I was like we were pretty close, like training partners. Like we pretty much traveled together, competed together, and kind of came up together. And then once I got into FP, he kind of got started getting weird with me. He's like, the FP stuff's kind of weird. I don't like that Naughty guy. Blah 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 blah. And then one day, there was a period where we kind of just stopped talking to each other. And then one day he just hit me up on Facebook, and he was like, and the way he addressed me was completely different than how we usually talk to each other. It was like he was talking to a stranger. He's like, hey man, how's everything going? Like, he never calls me man, number one. And then, like, we just started chatting, and then he started like kind of saying like, he tried to get into like this philosophical argument about why everything doesn't need to be mechanical. And then I was
Oh
like, look,
God! Oh my God, bro! Get the fuck out of here!
yeah,
Keep going. This is so
well,
good. Oh,
interest,
oh.
interestingly enough, this person happened to be from a specific part of Europe, and I think he was Jewish, and he happened to like art. I mean, these are like things
Hold
I
on.
see
So
a
hold up,
lot too.
hold up, hold up, Chris. Did it come back to determinism versus free will?
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
God damn it, bro.
Yeah.
That's like
Yeah.
crazy. It's things like this to my audience that just blow my mind because obviously this is the
Yeah.
most interesting thing in the world to me. there's nothing more interesting. That there's
So
always that divide. You can tell when somebody's a determinist, and you can tell when somebody's for free will. But yeah, keep going.
yeah. So then so we kind of got into that little discussion about that, and then I was like, look, bro, I don't need to explain myself to you anymore. Like, I'm just gonna do what I'm gonna do, and you could do what you're gonna do. And then the last thing you said, well, haha, okay, enjoy being part of a cult. That was like the last thing he said. And then yeah, we haven't spoken since. But yeah.
Just so we're clear on this, guys. When I say that I'm a determinist, I realize that I can't exist outside the confines of a gravitational field. Anybody who argues with that is what I would classify as an idiot. You'd be an imbecile to realize that. You are only given the opportunity to make decisions in reality when there's an environment that permits it. So, for example, you can't afford to eat bread if there is no agricultural system present to produce bread for you to eat. So, therefore, like when people say, you know what, you need to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, be like, well, what if you don't have arms? How are you going to pick yourself up from your bootstraps? Like, there are conditions that shape every single biological organism. There are forces that impact every organism in reality. And for me, when I think about making decisions in my life, I always think about things from the perspective of, okay, what can I do in what can I do to my environment to modify it so my environment nurtures me to behave in a better fashion? That's how I always orient my decisions. And the funny thing is, when that premise of people when they say, you know, I really don't like that Naudi guy, it comes back down to the fact that like their neurons, the way that their neocortex does math, which is not even math, it's just like gibberish. The way that their brain does gibberish pretty much tells you, oh, okay, this guy's for determinism. He's saying that I don't have a choice in the matter. Oh man. So ultimately, if you become a determinist, pretty much what it means for one is that you have to relinquish any identity that you have within yourself. You have to pretty much say, hey, look, I no longer am Naudi, and these are my hobbies. You know, I like to play the guitar, and I'm a musician. And you know, people should value me about being a musician. And you know what? I really like philosophy and all this stuff and blah blah blah. When you become a determinist, you understand that we are at the mercy of natural forces, and based upon how we react to those natural forces determines how good our life is going to be. So therefore, you need to, if you're a determinist, automatically you have to be a utilitarian. And if you're not good at anything that relates to utilitarianism, you are immediately going to default to going to be one of these free will people because you realize you're on the chopping block. Because if everybody becomes a determinist, they're going to look at you and be like, well, what are you bringing to the table? So determinism forces you to look at somebody and say, hey, are you bringing something to the table, or are you just bringing some stupid bullshit empty hype? And this ultimately segues me back into the subject matter, bro, where I started thinking about when I look at all the people that have the podcasts, most of them are peddling what? The majority of the time. Majority of podcasts, are they perpetuating determinism or free will? When you think about it.
It's free will, but it's like free will with like solipsism almost. It's like really bizarre.
With what?
Like solipsism, like they live in just like it's like they don't acknowledge reality. You know what I mean? You know, like
yes.
The whole the universe is on your side, that kind of shit.
Yes. But it all falls under the umbrella of free will, and so you guys have to realize that the reason I don't typically have people from major podcasts or major news networks or anything like that reach out is because they all give into this narrative of free will. Like I had this gal who did yoga, who hit me up on this podcast specifically after I made a post about yoga or something like that. And so I got into it with her, and she said, you know, maybe you just don't understand what yoga is about. And I'm like, let me dig deeper. Let me draw the free will out of her. Let me draw it out. It literally took me about 5 minutes, and then it pretty much came back down to the fact that, you know, that you have to make a choice to do good or whatever it may be. Like it pretty much, I forgot what it directly went into, but ultimately we wound up having a discussion about free will. I started bringing up the fact that that humans are at the mercy of nature at all times, and ultimately, within a matter of 3 or 4 minutes after that, she stopped talking to me. She's just like, I don't want to talk anymore. So ultimately, but she couldn't insert a pejorative term anymore, because then I'll be like, hey, pejorative, here's a practitioner out of Europe halfway across the world who spent 5 days working with me. Here are the results that he got. with somebody who has cerebral palsy. If this is a cult, there's something wrong with you. So pretty much, I don't get the cult thing anymore. That I'm a leader of a cult anymore. I typically just get people who just stop talking. I don't get that.
Right.
So pretty much what happens is anytime you pin a free will person from our community into a corner, they're going to say that you're now part of a cult because there comes a point where they hit a place where they're like, wait a minute, this guy's funneling me in and saying, hey, look, what do you bring to the table? What's your actual value to society? What are the results that you have to back up your perspectives? And what as it relates to actually solving problems, what problems do you actually solve? Because what it seems like to me is that you want to give into these free will narratives as much as possible so you avoid telling people that you don't really do much for society, that you're expendable essentially. That's what so much of this seems to be about. I would imagine that coming from the background that you're coming from, being around FP long enough, that you probably feel a similar way, correct?
100%. Yes.
Yes, and so that's kind of the narrative that we push. I'm glad that you're bringing things up like this, Chris, because it really solidifies the battle that we're up against in FP. We have people on one side of the spectrum that really believe, that are stupid enough to think that we believe in free will, and then the other side of the spectrum where people are actually solving problems that understand mechanisms, who are you have one side that understands mechanisms and then the other one that just refuses to even acknowledge that they exist. That everything just comes down to the mind, and that if you can figure out your mind, that you solve the problems, not realizing that it's like whatever physiological state your body is going to determine how you make a decision altogether. And we're narrowing it down to that place. I just wonder how long it's going to take for these free willies to to finally come around and say, you know what, maybe this free will nonsense doesn't really make sense. I just wonder. That's the question that I always ask. I'm like, are people ever going to get it? And so, yeah, like, just keep in mind that it's like, if you're in FP, it's going to be really difficult. This is going to be one of the biggest struggles that relates to dealing with people that are in this industry. They believe in free will, and the reason they believe in free will is because they really don't want to adopt a real sense of responsibility. And whether you look at liberal circles or conservative circles, it really just comes down to that. That if people feel that they're making decisions for themselves, that it means they're not going to acknowledge the environment. And if they're not going to acknowledge the environment, then good luck trying to change anything about them. Because if they feel that they're in control of themselves, they're going to eat grains, they're going to drink beer, they're going to get high, they're going to go have dinner and do all the things that normal people would do with socializing and never want to change. So it comes down to that. If a person can give into determinism to its fullest capacity and understand that the only thing that you have a choice in is if the range of options that you have enables you to actually make a decision that optimizes your environment, that's going to ultimately be what changes your life for the better. But that if you don't make that if you don't operate within the confines of those choices, that ultimately you're going to go through the cycle of degeneration over and over again. But yeah, man, it's fascinating to see how other people, especially when you got the whole cult thing. I'm like, when's the free will going to come out? When's it going to come out? When's it coming? And then sure enough, you dropped it and it was right there. Do you deal with that much anymore? I would imagine you don't. You probably shielded yourself well enough from people to not have to deal with that shit anymore, right?
Yeah, I know, man. I'm at the point now where, like, I think when people, like, interact with me, they know there's, like, a line they don't want to cross. It's like an unspoken line that they don't want to cross. I mean, I like it. It makes my life a lot easier. And if we need to have the tough discussions, I'm open to it. But like, for example, I'm pretty sure a lot of guys deal with this. They probably have female clients that, like, vent to them about, certain FP posts. None of my female clients do that. They never do that with me. I think it comes back to just how strong is your frame, your functional frame.
Yes.
Like, how much do you actually internalize functionality? I think that's a big part of it. And, like, I mean, that's something I work on every day, man. It's like,
bro, me too. Me too. So many times I'm just like, I recently I had somebody, because there's always politics and everything. It's like I had somebody reach out who has a decently successful podcast, and he's connected to the Free Willers. He happens to be a Free Willer himself, and he hits me up, and he's like, he hadn't hit me up for a few years. I didn't blow him off. We kind of blew each other off, and I'm like, he's into touch butt, and I'm not really into that stuff, as you know. And so he's obviously still doing touch butt on social media. He hits me up, and he's like, he hit me up after I had this recent podcast with that one with Chaos Boxing. And so he hits me up, and he's like, hey, would you be interested in wanting to do a podcast, man? I'd like to catch up. And I was like, I saw it, and I was like, you know what? No, it's like, I'm like, whatever. I'm gonna message back. And you know, on Instagram, he hits me up because we had messaged before. So I was like, okay, let me answer. And I respond. I'm like, yeah. I was like, let me know what you want to talk about, just so I can prepare myself to make sure that we have a good showing when I put it up. It shows at some point that he's seen the message, right? It shows that he's seen the message, and it shows like, okay, he's seen the message. It's been 2 hours, hasn't responded, and I'm like, okay. I was like, I'm gonna give him another 2 hours. If he doesn't respond within those 2 hours, I'm gonna have to fuck this guy off, because I know if I was Joe Rogan, and I was talking to him, he would respond to me in less than a microsecond, right? So his perspective is, in his mind, and this is generally speaking how people operate, is they will typically treat, if a person treats you in relation to your status and not your actual value, your intrinsic value, you got to cut them the fuck out of your life. And that's just what I've realized for myself, is that in life, you're always going to deal with this circumstance. People are completely detached from this notion of like, let me treat somebody for their value. And